I kind of brought to it was a kind of narrative, skill. Well, Runaway had that. It was a way of telling a story. So even You Give Love a Bad Name had, we're telling a story, and then comes the payoff.
Yeah.
So Livin On A Prayer is the same way. And so I encouraged that. And so they did it without me, Wanted Dead or Alive, I'll Be There For You. They had a great writing relationship. So I came in and brought kind of maybe a different flavor to it.
Again, I mean, it's a pleasure to finally meet you, because as far back as I think when the one of the early Bon Jovi albums came out, I remember reading your name on it, and I was very intrigued. And then obviously many years later, when YouTube came along and stuff, and then I got to know a little more about you. So it's a pleasure to finally meet you.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Let's dive right in, Desmond. So, there's, you've been writing songs for many years, and now there's the book of sort of both forms of creative expression. Is one more challenging for you than the other?
It was very difficult to write this book with my collaborator, David Ridds, because, first of all, I hate looking backwards. I only want to look from right here, right now, forward. And so going back over very painful parts of my life and things that I had buried deep, just surfacing. And it was very emotional for me. And I realized how many terrible mistakes I'd made and hurt people. And, it's like a reckoning. It's less of a book than it is a reckoning.
Mm-hmm. Given that that's the way it is, how did the book come about? Was it something that you needed a bit of convincing to do, or was it something that you always wanted to do?
It was part of a natural progression of my life to want to make a book, because at a certain point I decided, because my husband and I have twin sons, Roman and Nyro, that I wanted to make sure that they received my legacy in a complete form, because they only know me as daddy. It's like, somebody to call for money. I wanted them to get to know the real me and understand where they came from. So that was my main motivation. And, I just feel that it was time. It was time to tell all these great stories, also for the fans, because there's so many nuggets in here. There's a little behind the scene things that you wouldn't find anywhere else.
Yeah. That's lovely that you say that for Roman and Nyro, that you want them to receive your legacy the way it is. I know there's a documentary you guys made as well, but I'm not able to see it here in India.
Oh wow! The documentary is called TWO: The Story of Roman and Nyro, and I don't know. I know that it's on iTunes and I know that it's on Amazon Prime, but I don't know if they do it just regionally, or I just have no idea. I was hoping that these things would be global.
Yeah.
But we made that movie. Well, we started it when they were born, but we released it 10 years ago in 2013. And we did a wonderful 10-year anniversary screening here in Palm Springs for the American Documentary Festival. And all our friends came, and it was just so wonderful, because the boys were on the stage, now, grown up, and also their surrogate mother was there, and Curtis and I and our director, we were all on the stage talking about the experience of having, created such a thing. And, that was the, that's part of the, the legacy, because they hadn't really seen that movie since they were little kids and they hated it. And now I think they enjoyed it this time. They said, we were funny.
How old are they now?
They're 21, because a lot of people, are afraid if their child is, born gay, that they'll suffer in their life and that they won't be grandparents. And we've proven that that's not true. We can have children, and in our case, they're biologically mine. And my husband Curtis was the caregiver parent, so it worked out because I work a lot, and he was the one that was and still is the closest to them.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. Has the whole writing a book, has it been a cathartic process for you, Desmond?
Writing the book has been very cathartic for me, because it's like I call it the reckoning. I'm looking back and I'm saying, okay, and I'm right up to now, and I'm not quite sure where to go next. I'm still doing my day job, which is what I call writing songs and hoping somebody will record them. But it becomes more and more difficult to do that because artists are surrounded by production teams and they don't let outsiders in. Before, you could send somebody a song, and even big stars, that had producers, and they would listen to it. But now it's so insulated, everybody in their own tribe.
Yeah.
So, but I don't give up. And so I also, my custom was always to collaborate with the artist, because they have a special interest in making sure their song that they have a financial interest in, and also that it's authentic to who they are, that gets onto the record.
Yeah.
So that's how I've basically done my career, collaborations with Kiss, Bon Jovi, Aerosmith, Joan Jett, Alice Cooper. It was always that. And it was very rare that I'd send somebody a song and they'd record it.
Yeah. Various points in the book stood out for me. And one of the things, sort of cutting to 1983, and, you spoke about getting a call from your manager back then, Winston Simone, and, who basically gave you a brief about wanting you to write a song. And there was a broad theme of the song. I think it was androgyny. And then it had to sound like Tina Turner. The verse had to sound like the Police. And it was so beautiful because you spoke about how that would eventually become the cornerstone of your sound. How would you describe your sound, Desmond? Because it's the pursuit of every artist to, I'm a photographer, and it's sort of a lifelong endeavor to find your sort of creative expression and your voice. How did you go about finding your sound?
Well, in that case, I had already gone through the cycle of my being in my band, my vocal band, Desmond Child and Rouge. Mm-hmm. And we had a deal at Capitol Records. We put out 2 albums the same year. We did a national tour. We were on Saturday Night Live, and then we fell apart. A lot of it had to do with my partner in it was Maria Vidal, and we were, boyfriend, girlfriend. And then I realized I was more gay than I was bi. And then it was very difficult to hold the group together. But then going into co-writing with Kiss and Bon Jovi, and it just, one thing led to the next, to the next, to the next. And I think that back when I was doing Desmond Child and Rouge, I had this vision of mixing styles, dance beats with rock guitars. And I talked Paul Stanley into the idea of doing a big Kiss song with a dance beat. And to this day, it's their biggest international hit of all time. I Was Made for Lovin' You. And so, I always say that there'd be no Desmond Child without Paul Stanley. I mean, it's just impossible, because he taught me how to write the Kiss way. which is writing for a stadium, and you write for the person in the last row, furthest away, that's who you're writing for.
Mm-hmm.
Because the songs have to communicate that strongly. And there's a KISS rule. You're never a victim. You're always victorious. It's uplifting and fun. And so I brought that into my other writing relationships with Bon Jovi and Aerosmith and even Joan Jett, and also later on in Latin music with Ricky Martin. If you listen to the chorus of Livin La Vida Loca, it's fist in the air, up. And so I think that if you look at the kind of, overall archetype of my sound, it's always a story. And there's always tension of opposites. Like, I hate myself for loving you. Heaven's on fire. You give love a bad name. So that was kind of signature to my sound. This tension of opposites. So the music also had to have opposites. The spooky, slow, verse of Livin On A Prayer. And then it climbs and climbs and then explodes. And that's an example, in a way, in an archetypal way, of my life, because I started out in such a low place. My mother was a single mom. She barely spoke English. We were so poor. We lived in the projects, very dangerous projects. I was afraid to go out. All I do was watch television, old Hollywood movies. And then, eventually, my mother was a songwriter, Elena Casals. She was trying all the time to get her songs recorded. It was very difficult for her. Mm-hmm. And something snapped inside of me. I said, I have to find a way of going from this low place to victory, to big explosion of who I am and uplift, bringing people hope. And that's a signature part of my sound, because my sound is not only just the sound with chords that are, modulating up and off, but it's the lyric. It's
absolutely.
It's the music is the soundtrack of the script.
Yeah.
Script are the lyrics.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one of the most, beautiful things about Living on a Prayer. And in the book, you talk about how that's sort of the centerpiece of your life in itself, of your career, so to speak. And how you've, I don't know if it's fair to say that I don't think you altered the sound of the band, but it's something that you found that you could add to it, like how you were able to take them and make them an arena rock band. I think that's what those songs did for them. Is it fair to say?
Are you speaking of Bon Jovi?
Bon Jovi, yeah. Yeah,
well...
And specifically Living on a Prayer.
Right, but they had their sound, and they already had a hit, Runaway.
Yeah.
And so they were, touring, and they had a lot of fans, and especially young girls, and they were very attractive and kind of dangerous, pirate-looking people, and with, Louis the 15th mullet bouffants. And I think what I kind of brought to it was a kind of narrative, skill. Well, Runaway had that. It was a way of telling a story. So even You Give Love a Bad Name had, we're telling a story, and then comes the payoff.
Yeah.
So Livin On A Prayer is the same way. And so I encouraged that. And so they did it without me, Wanted Dead or Alive, I'll Be There For You. They had a great writing relationship. So I came in and brought kind of maybe a different flavor to it. And I think that one of the elements is that I'm Latin, and so is Tico. We're both Cuban.
Yeah.
So the idea of having, kind of like a soulful rhythm, and the bass lines, having a lot of Motown, into it, created a new sound.
Yeah.
It really, and then, every, metal band started turning towards the Bon Jovi style.
And I think lyrically also, just the whole sort of lyrical architecture of the song, it's so relatable, it's so simple. I think one of the sort of mysteries of pop culture is that some songs really stick and some don't. But this song was just so relatable, so simple. And I was looking at some numbers. I think it got 1 billion plays on YouTube or something like that a couple of months
ago. On Spotify, yes.
Spotify, yeah.
1 billion plays. And so, not that many songs have reached that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and that's only across 7 or 8 years that Spotify has existed.
Yeah.
Think of all the millions of times it was played for the last 30 years before that.
Yeah.
So, I bet it's more than 1 billion if you think of it.
Yeah, but what does that kind of fame feel like, Desmond?
Well, it's not fame for me.
Well,
it's fame for the band, because that's their business, is to be famous.
That's true, but you were part of, you wrote the song, right? You were part of a team that wrote the song.
Right, but they don't even barely have credits for writers anymore. You have to look and search under more and find out who wrote it and find out more. Before, we used to have our names on the LP.
Yeah.
Then they had cassettes. There was no room for our names on the cassettes. That maybe it was on the little package of the cassette. Then came CDs. There was no room for names on CDs. Maybe they, in the jewel box, they'd have like something. But to save paper and all that, they wouldn't even print the lyrics. They would just be gorgeous pictures of the band, and that was the end of it. So it's not easy if you're a man that's like behind the velvet curtain, like me, to get noticed. And that's really not my role, to take anything away from the fame and momentum of the band. But I think that because I've collaborated on so many hits, and you string them all together, it is pretty impressive,
Absolutely.
That all together, I've sold more records than almost I'm up there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because all of those different bands added up together to make hundreds of millions of sold records and now billions of streams.
Yeah, yeah. It's incredible. But tell me, Desmond, from a songwriting perspective, have you ever had to struggle to write a song? You're so prolific. You're able to almost write on a dime. Like I was reading, you're given a brief and you're able to come up with a song. Has it ever been a struggle for you? Have you ever been stuck?
I've never been stuck, because I think that writer's block and being stuck and all that is part of, the troubled part of, some people's minds. I may have, shifted my troubles to, love affairs, or relationships and things like that. When it came to writing songs, there's no stop. There's no writer's block. That doesn't exist for me. I can, like a little bird that gets a little string to make a nest, they start with one little something and they wrap it around a twig, and before you know it, there's a giant nest. That's how I am. It doesn't take much. All it takes is just a tiny little thread.
Mm-hmm.
And that come out of something the artist is saying, or their desire, their wish, or, many times the lyrics or the title comes out of something the artist says. And then I, with my creative imagination, I build the story around that idea.
Do you ever think about sort of being inspired by something versus being original? Is that something that ever sort of crosses your mind?
No, say that again. Inspired what?
But how important is it to be original versus borrowing from different ideas and different things that have been done before. Is that something you think about a lot?
I think almost 99% of everybody is in that category. And maybe there's 1% of somebody that comes out with something completely fresh and unique. I don't fall in that category because I'm I remember when we were little, me and my mom and my brother, we'd walk down the streets and we'd carry, old furniture that somebody left outside and take it to our house, trundle down, and try to see if we could make it work. I'd paint something or even, so I'm all about finding things and putting it all together and then standing back and saying, wow, that looks great. That sounds great. And so original, who's original? Like fresh out of nowhere. You can't even say Bob Dylan is, because he came out of the folk medium with Woody Guthrie and that. I think that once people got going, the Beatles were influenced by the Everly Brothers.
Yeah.
And this was written by Boudleaux and Felice Bryant, like Bye Bye Love and, all of these things. And then once they got in the studio with their producer, they started incorporating all of this kind of very British, those little trumpets or, this kind of little bands that would be on the corner, collecting for charity, or it sounded something like that. And, their creativity was, who knew that those crazy boys from Liverpool would have that much talent? So I think that, to this day, there's so many things that I listened to. I said, oh, that's from that Beatles song. That's from that Beatles song. So people come along and maybe they don't create something original, but they change the course of popular music. And I would say that in a way, Kiss with I Was Made for Lovin' You changed the course of popular music, because all of a sudden everyone said, rock guitars can go with dance beats. Wow. Then came Prince and Madonna and, Michael Jackson. Everybody beat it, all that, because it opened up the idea. Before then, it was all R&B kind of playing like disco. And so it didn't have big rock anthemic stuff.
Yeah. True.
So then later on, with Bon Jovi, same thing, combining elements of, Rolling Stones and AC/DC and Kiss and Bruce Springsteen, and weaving that all together created a new sound. And then later on, when I moved to Miami, my husband and I moved to Miami after the earthquake in the Northridge Ridge earthquake that scared us to death. We moved to Miami, and I started going back to my roots, my Cuban roots, and going to learn salsa, going to salsa dance lessons, and going to all these clubs. And so then I met Ricky Martin. And then I realized, well, he's like the Latin Elvis.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's kind of like John Bon Jovi, sort of like the rock Elvis, right?
Yep.
And I said, why not put Latin music in with that kind of, real broad stadium kind of anthemic stuff? And it worked. So I would say that Ricky Martin, because, he was the biggest of all of the acts. We sold, I think, 13 million off of the first record. All the competitors, Mark Anthony, J-Lo, everybody else, they weren't even, they were selling 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, maybe something like that. Ricky Martin had a huge global impact. Everybody wanted a Latin lover or wanted to be a Latin lover or learn to smoke cigars and drink rum. I was on cigar bars. Every straight guy I ever saw, clicked their hair, and then all of a sudden they had the little flip up with the frosted front, like Ricky. It's like, okay, That's not,
Yeah.
but okay, come on, let's do this. And everybody learned to dance, and the whole idea of dance raves and everything, it changed. And so if you can see a progression between Livin La Vida Loca and Despacito, which my good friends Louis Fonsi and Erica Ender wrote. So reggaeton and all of that comes out of that turn in the millennium.
Yeah.
Where music became global in a big way. And I think that Ricky gave, and the sound that we made gave, hope to all kinds of regional Latin music that they could also cross over. And Absolutely. So I think that's, that was revolutionary. I love all that. I mean, yes. I started, really loving the sounds they got for Slumdog Millionaire, with those big drums, there's like giant sounding drums, and it kind of, I don't know where that sound came from, because it seemed like a lot of samples were put into it. So yeah. It brought kind of like an Indian music into like a kind of like cool place. I just love it.
Yeah. There's a lot of that.
India twice,
I was going to ask you about it, because I read that you were in Mumbai back in the day. And
yes, I came to study with Swami Chidvilasananda after Swami Muktananda passed away, just like right after, months after. And I went to Ganeshpuri, and I worked at the ashram there, scrubbing floors and washing dishes. And I was there for almost 2 months, just doing all the chanting, all the prayer, and all of that. And, they had this amazing garden where they had all the gods had their own statues, and you could go and pray. It was a very, special, magical time for me. And then I returned with my husband, Curtis, with Deepak Chopra.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Or a workshop that had 400 people called How to Know God. And that's where we met Angela, our surrogate mother. She was there with her mother, Ruby, and we just bonded, and we had every meal together, and I kept looking at her. She was so full of life. We already had this idea we wanted to have children, didn't know how we were going to do it. And so she said, "Why are you looking at me like that?" I said, "Because you're going to have our kid." And she said, "What? Ooh, get away." Meanwhile, that night she had a dream, and Deepak almost called it biblical, where she dreamt that she had our baby. And so then when we got back to the States, she said, "I've been thinking about it a lot, and because of this dream I had, it won't go away. I think I'm supposed to do this." And that's the thing about India, is that there's always a spiritual energy, that's everywhere. And that kind of faith or belief is real. And you get swept up in it, and there changes start happening to your own life, even as a visitor. And so that's why, I love and honor, India and all the, magnificent things that come out of it. And I'm glad that my songs might be popular there too, in exchange.
Yeah, but that's such a beautiful story, Desmond. Did you ever get to write here? Because I know the Beatles, when they came to Rishikesh, I think it was 60, 67, 68, they wrote a lot of stuff, a lot of songs came out of that trip, I think. Did you manage to write a lot? Was the environment conducive to write?
No, because we were busy with the workshop, get up at 6, meditation, and then you do your yoga, and then you show up for breakfast, and then you go sightseeing. Everything was like, and then in the afternoon, there's the chanting, and then Deepak comes and he talks about something fantastic. And then there's dinner with like fire breathers and people twirling around, and it was great. So they was pretty busy. But I think that the main thing for us is that we picked up the spirit of, how it all came together in a magical, mystical way, that we could have our own children. And we still carry that beautiful memory and thought and energy that has guided us ever since.
That's so beautiful. So beautiful. Desmond, you spoke about Desmond Child and the Rouge, and then obviously you've been writing songs for other people. How different is it to write for yourself and your own music versus writing for other people?
When I was writing songs for Desmond Child and Rouge, basically, I co-wrote a few songs with Maria and with Paul Stanley and some other collaborators, but mainly it was my own writing. And because I had come out of a kind of a system of singer-songwriter, the songs were confessional about my life. And if you go to our second album, Runners in the Night, the opening song, The Truth Comes Out, was me facing the fact that although I love Maria with all my heart, she is one of my soulmates, or like up there with all the people that I have loved and continue to love, and she's one of the godmothers of our children. I knew that I couldn't stay, and so the lyric says, I confess my innermost feelings with strangers in the dark, and my words fly like sparks from my mouth as the truth comes out, and so that was me telling the world, but unfortunately nobody picked up on it. Nobody cared. But those were confessional songs that had to do with my own life. And so I guess it's a lot different when you have a bona fide real star like John Bon Jovi and helping to write confessional songs with him writing about his own life. That's much more interesting because he really is a huge star. So I think you have to be a very special person to have everything go right for the world to be interested in your life. Tracy Chapman, Fast Cars. That song is just so special to this day. People doing covers of it, it lives on. And, with me, I started realizing that I have an empathetic heart. So when I go to work with somebody, I listen to their story and I feel what they feel. It's called being an empath. And so then they trust me, and they get a good feeling, a trusting feeling around me, and then we start writing from that place. And so I think that I'm obviously much better in seeing somebody else, not myself, and what they need to be the best they can be. Turning the cameras towards me, I was, I guess my confidence was shaken, because when we were in Desmond Child and Rouge, I was like a rock star, the big hair, everything, like 8 years before Bon Jovi.
Yeah.
And, I sang with these great women, and, they were sexy, and we were street, and we were Latino, and we had so many things going for us, but it all came too fast. And we didn't have, management that really understood us, or a label that really understood us and encouraged us to keep going. So it all worked out as it was supposed to, because like I said, if you add up all the records I've sold, it's over 500 million. And
the other thing, the other thing in the book that really, some of the stories in the book, the Barbara Streisand story specifically, sort of underscored the value of patience for me, and sort of just to get a little bit of an insight into your process when you spoke about how they took you through her sonic landscape the second time around. Can you talk a little bit about just that whole experience of the first time trying to work with her, getting sort of rejected, the song getting rejected, and then the second time when they called you?
Right. Like 10 years, 15 years later, more. Jay Landers is Barbara's executive music supervisor, and he's become a close friend. And we've worked on other, projects that he's brought me into, like he came to see a rehearsal of mine for a show that I was doing I for this place called 54 Below. I think it was 54 Below, or maybe 54 Below. And in the show, there's a song from my Broadway musical, which, that's a big dream of mine to have to work in Broadway. But one of the songs from my show Cuba Libre, which is the true story of my family before and after the Cuban Revolution, there's a big number called Where Do I Go From You? And that song has a kind of Streisand feeling. And so, afterward he said, I'm trying to put songs together for Barbara's next record. Would you write one? And so then he said, when you're in LA, let's sit down and we'll listen to her sound, and all the things that, where she sounds the best, the kind of jumps that she does and kind of vowels that she sings in her instrument. And we spent the afternoon together, and I started thinking about when I first saw Barbra Streisand, which was in a movie called Funny Girl. Yeah. And I was 15 years old, and I saw her on this tugboat crossing the Hudson River, and she passes in front of the Statue of Liberty. And she's holding flowers up like this, and then the Statue of Liberty's holding the torch. And I saw, moment. And, when I met her, I told her, well, that moment made me gay. She said, everybody tells me that. It was one of those like triumphant moments, like, don't rain on my parade. I'm going to be me, all of that. But the image of the Statue of Liberty and her, then I thought she, to me, is like Lady Liberty also, because she's very political and she's a philanthropist. She really cares about people and what's going to happen, in the future. And, she's very compassionate. And so she, I started thinking about the parallels between her and the Statue of Liberty, who's a female, also welcoming immigrants. And, give me you're tired and you're poor, you're huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The all of that's on a plaque inside the Statue of Liberty, also by a poem written by a woman. So all of those things combined, gave me the inspiration to write a tribute to Lady Liberty for her to sing. And I didn't co-write that one. I wrote it by myself. And it was one of the few songs I've written in many decades just by myself. But it all came through me. And I was lucky enough that she chose a song and allowed me to co-produce it with her. Yeah. And it's really, massively, impressive, just like she sang like she always did, like with those big notes, and like it's so Streisand. It's perfect for her. Yeah. So I have 5 or 6 songs tucked away in my back pocket. So when she's ready to make another album, I'm going to have things to present. She's not yet. She just wrote a big book called My Name is Barbara, 1,000 pages. She's been doing the audiobook herself. And she, there'll be probably a compilation of her greatest hits, from that period. And I think maybe, just maybe, Lady Liberty will be on it, I hope. And then I think she'll be ready to make her next record, her next studio.
Yeah, because it was just so beautiful the way you set that whole thing up and how you sort of gave me context and described her house. It was just brilliant.
Well, I mean, it was so alive for me because I was writing my book during that time. So I was able to remember every little detail.
It was brilliant. And you had made a reference to the album she did with Barry Gibb. And I remember that album cover because I had it on cassette and I wore that cassette out, just playing it, back to front. So I was actually listening to that this evening.
Oh my God, that album is a masterpiece. And the Beatles, I mean, such an influence on me. And because they were already huge. They were big when I was coming up. But, if you see a documentary called How Do You Mend a Broken Heart about the Bee Gees, you will see that everything ended in 1979.
Mm-hmm.
The era ended. And in fact, it was kind of like a very racist and homophobic wave, sort of like what we're seeing now, where they took all the disco records, including the Bee Gees, and we went to a stadium in Chicago, I think, and they made a big pile and they burned them. Reminds me of the Nazis burning books.
Yeah.
And that's happening now again, because everything old is new again. So, that's when we went from a more of an R&B dance style to rock. We switched to rock. And then that was my footstep into the door of rock music. Because after that, all this heavy metal music, basically there were no people of color in that genre.
Uh-huh.
Jean Beauvoir, okay, whatever. Very few. And of course, there was Prince and Michael Jackson, which was even far beyond and above this kind of, metal waves that I rode the river of metal through the. But that's what happened. It was like a switch, because we had gone through this wonderful not renaissance, but explosion of creativity in disco music. And, gay people started to feel free to go to clubs dancing, and they were playing, Bee Gees, they were playing Marvin Gaye, Motown, and then, Evelyn Champagne King, and, Taste of Honey. All of these things were happening, and it was a joyous thing. But I think some people didn't like that we had a place to feel free.
Yeah.
So they said, well, let's kill the music. Then they'll have nothing to dance to. So I don't understand why. What threat are we? None. It's easy. It's easy because it pushes some crazy fear, emotional buttons in people. And instead of the politicians talking about policy to help people, they, rattle the cage, that, they're going to go after your children. It's like, not really. That is just so impossible. The people that hurt children are not gay people.
Absolutely.
It's and leave their guns around and their children pick them up and they're not careful because there aren't enough strict laws about those things.
Ridiculous. Because, you also said something interesting in the book, eye-opening rather, that, it's one thing to be accepted as a songwriter and to be gay, but as a producer, and you said that it prevails to this day that you don't think people would be very accepting of you as a producer.
Well, during that period where with all those metal bands, it was impossible for me to get a job as the producer. I would get a job as a co-writer, but I think these hetero macho bands with lipstick on and makeup, whatever, and earrings and, black nails and all of these things, very masculine. They weren't comfortable with the idea of the producer being gay because it was threatening. Because the producer's the boss and they didn't want a gay person to be a boss. So there was always a glass ceiling, even in corporate life, where, okay, you can be gay up to a certain point. You can't be the CFO, CEO, but you can be somewhere in there because you have some value. But all of that played into the music business because the music business is very corporate, and the A&R guys were chosen by the straight, owners of these record companies. It's like a buddy system, and they would pick their friends from college or whatever to produce the records that were all straight. So for many years, for dozens of years, for decades, I was the only out gay producer there was, but they didn't give me bands. It wasn't until the genre started dying that they were desperate, and so all of a sudden, they were giving me bands to produce because nobody cared about them and nobody wanted it. But, it was like one of those things where, it's like I'm watching bands making bad records.
Yeah.
And bad, kind of not great versions of songs we collaborated on. It's like, I could have produced that so much better. So they gave me solo artists. So I started, my first one was with Ronnie Spector, Jennifer Rush, then China Phillips, then it was Alice Cooper, Joan Jett, all of these solo artists was what I was given. Bonnie Tyler. Then it was okay, then it wasn't, because, and a lot of women also. And the kind of Ricky Martin fell into that, not fell, but I rose up into the Ricky Martin world where it was okay for me to be gay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Much, much later we found out why.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's,
so I think that to this day, there is a glass ceiling in it. And I see that there aren't very many female engineers, recording engineers. I don't see a lot of female assistants in studios. I don't see any trans, in that world at all. And, I don't know what it is. I mean, they're brilliant, musicians, like Orianthi and Nita, and all these, very strong women that are writing, and on stage and all of that. But in terms of the behind the scenes, I don't see a gay culture there. Where there may be an exception would be in maybe dance music or EDM and all, because there may be more gay men who are DJs that then cross over into production. But this, after many decades, Linda Perry popped up, as the first female openly gay producer. But where are we in this world? When this happened, it wasn't so much the anti-gay thing. That only happened recently with, the near governor and all of that, that is trying to make brownie points with the far right. But in that time, the birth certificate said mother, father, and they wouldn't allow my husband, we weren't married yet, to be a legal parent. So we got so upset that we sold our 4 home studios, everything, and moved to California, where they were acknowledging, same-sex parents and giving legal rights, because there are hundreds of family law issues that come up, for us as a family to be safe and protected. And if you don't have that, if something happened to me, a relative could come and take away our children from the person that was there, feeding them when they were born. And so we moved to California. It took 2 years going through the courts, and we finally got the day when we became a real family. And but even so, the California said, well, but you need the birth certificate from the state that the children were born in. We had to go back, and then they finally allowed his name not to be on the front, but on the back. There was a line to be, and so the lawyer in Florida that took care of us was trying to help. She took that case all the way up, and they finally, Florida changed it to be parent 1, parent 2. And so thus, when we got legal rights, legal marriage, then things kind of evened out. But that's going backwards now. Every state is now starting very anti-LGBT things. And it's like, people, get a life. If you don't want to, if you don't want gay marriage, don't marry a gay person. It's that stupid. Just live and help live. Live.
Absolutely.
Help.
Yeah.
That's my motto. Live and help live.
Yeah.
Not people down in their families. And, so many people live lives of misery in the closet. Many people just couldn't take it and killed themselves.
Yeah.
They find their place. And that's going on right now. Teen suicide is, 7 out of every 10 teen suicides has to do with sexual identity, gender orientation, and all that. In a world where we're only 5% of the population. So do you see how, unfair that is? And the fact that, religion, I can't even begin to talk about that. But they encourage this kind of very strict idea of what a man is, what a woman is, and how they can even go to bed with each other to create children. See, because they, went through this whole phase now where they destroyed, after 50 years, the law that allowed a woman to choose whether to go forward with a pregnancy or not. They destroyed that. Now 21 states are making it criminal to do that. And then, it's like they want to do that with the gay community. They want to start saying, well, if you're gay, we don't want you to be a teacher. If you're gay, we don't want you to do this. We don't want books in the library that say, hey, there's different kinds of families. And so they also don't want fertility clinics. So they don't want embryos to be killed, but they don't want them to live either on the other side or to be made. And there are millions of people, even from, especially from straight families where the parents want to have children, but they have trouble. So they go to a fertility clinic and they get help. Well, they want to close down the fertility clinics. So, it's like, which way do you want it? Do you want embryos to live? You want embryos to die? Don't want embryos to die? Don't want embryos to live? What is this?
Yeah.
It's like a person has, should have the dignity and the support legally to choose parenthood when they're ready to. Because then on the other side, they don't want to pay to take care of all these, unwanted children. Because, that's welfare. We don't want to pay it. We don't want our taxes to go up. So where do these people go? Oh, they go on the street. And then they go into the incarceration. But maybe that benefits somebody because, as taxpayers, we're paying $100 a day per criminal to keep them going. And there are over 2 million people in jail. So somebody is making 2 million times 100 every day to keep people in jail. So you see what I'm saying? It's a very corrupt system. And if you had wanted children that are nurtured and taken care of, they would be least likely to fall into, the kind of despair and crime and drugs and prostitution and human trade, all these violent things that happen.
Yeah.
Because wanted children are protected and loved like our children were.